You are listening to The Material Revolution, a podcast dedicated to building a better understanding of and relationship to textiles, fibers, and resources. I am your host, Catherine Susi, and I'm sitting down with artists, designers, educators, scientists, and creative thinkers from around the globe about their specialized knowledge and experience in working with fibers, processes, techniques, and technologies with the intention to create awareness, inspire knowledge, address responsible practices, encourage creativity, and to build a material community. So I welcome you to tune in and listen to those who are contributing towards change and a material revolution. Before we dive into today's interview and content, you can find us at www.thematerialrevolution.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Material Revolution. And to view some of our video interviews, hop on over to our YouTube channel. Well, hello and welcome back to The Material Revolution. I connected with London-based artist and eco-sustainable designer Jose Hendo. Her award-winning designs incorporates Ugandan barkcloth into her collections, which reflects a mixture of her African heritage and British influence. So what is barkcloth, you ask? Well, there's a common misconception around the use of this term barkcloth that I just want to clarify for a second, because what my discussion with Josie today is essentially talking about a textile that's considered the oldest cloth made by humans and was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Material in 2005. And where this common misconception lies about this cloth in relation to this term barkcloth is because it was around the mid-20th century that the term barkcloth was applied to a common cotton fabric structure that incorporated a slub-like texture woven into the structure to mimic the texture of bark. And it's because of this that I've noticed and I've experienced in my years as an educator that people confuse this form of barkcloth with what Josie and I are going to be discussing today. And it's important that I address this because it's not the only cloth and only terminology that has been hijacked by the industry to market and promote a textile. And while this is all well and good, it is a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing kind of approach to marketing, which to me is no different than the types of greenwashing that textile companies and fashion brands have adopted as part of their marketing strategy. However, on the other hand, it's great to pay homage to the history of textiles and be inspired by the materials and resources and processes that have come before us. But what I want to illustrate for you is that because there is a lot of misinformation related to textiles, a lot of it has to do with how we interpret its communication. And I do think there needs to be some more accountability and better communication by companies and brands when it comes to the use of terminology, because it's done a huge disservice into how we value textiles. And this is what motivated me to create this podcast, is to build a better understanding and knowledge of textiles, resources, and processes. But really, it's about developing a better communication around textiles so that we can build a better relationship to our materials. And it's through the conversations that I'll have on this podcast with experts that will hopefully capture and uncover what lies unspoken and uncommunicated through the textiles that we will discuss on this podcast. And so my interview with Josie is an in-depth discussion into her relationship and expertise in working with barkcloth. And to share with you a little bit of insight, I do want to spend a moment to describe to you what this material looks and feels like. If you could imagine a non-woven skin-like material that's kind of like a hybrid between leather and paper. And its color is deep and robust and comes in these varying shades of rusty brown that also has this beautiful suede-like texture. In Uganda, where Josie's from, this material is harvested from the matuba tree. But before we go any further, I do want to make a point that barkcloth production historically comes from the mulberry tree family and has been cultivated in parts of the world such as southern China and in places such as Indonesia, and has been found in Polynesian textiles, but it's also been found and cultivated in pockets throughout the oceanic region. But what makes this material so captivating is in how it's harvested and processed. Josie and I talk about this a little bit, but it's important to understand that these trees are carefully stripped of its fibrous inner bark, and it's a process that's repeated yearly for up to 60 years of that tree before it's retired. It's from here that these strips are beaten into large sheets, large pieces of fabric, and its result is that deep, robust, golden, rust-like color that I was just describing, that then is allowed to be further transformed into clothing, blankets, and into other useful textile products. But the magic of this textile exists in the relationship between its regenerative process and the farmers who harvest and cultivate it. My conversation with Josie discusses this relationship with an emphasis on the important cultural significance of this resource to the people of Uganda and how it continues to be a material innovation and a leader in sustainability. Her dedication to educating and preserving this centuries-old technique has led her to develop two important initiatives in the past decade: Bark to the Roots and the R3 campaign. I invite you to join us as we exchange our observations about this textile and the important role it has in developing relationships and in building a material community. But before we transition into my interview, I do want to say that before we started, kind of off camera, we spent some time chatting, and I asked my editor to keep part of that as a bonus at the end of this episode. So please stay tuned after the credits, the end credits of the show, to tune into that. So I invite you now to settle in, grab your favorite cup of tea, and prepare yourself to get to know a little bit more about Barkcloth.
Hello, my name is Jose Hendo. I am an eco-sustainable designer artist calling from London in the United Kingdom, and I am very passionate about the environment, but I'm also, through my work, able to kind of do something about it. And what else do I say?
I think you said it all. Welcome, Josie. It's great to be able to connect with you today. I know that we are both situated in London, and
Yeah,
unfortunately, I'm not able to come and meet you and visit and speak with you in your studio in order to record this interview. I mean, thankfully, because of modern day technology, we have the ability to connect in this
absolutely.
way. So I
Absolutely.
appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
Thank
And as
you.
I just noted, it was in 2018 when I actually had the opportunity to visit you in your studio. It was
Yeah,
before I relocated here.
yes, I remember
And
that.
yes, and
Mhm.
you were so generous in spending time with me and also explaining and introducing me more intimately to the material and resource which we're going to be speaking more, I suppose say just intimately about today, because of the fact that you have been spending, I mean, in reading about your relationship and working with this material and this resource, it says 15 years, but I think you've been working and your knowledge of this material and resource has been longer than 15 years.
Yes, it is. It is, I think,
And
I think
so
that's an old, yeah,
the material that we're actually speaking about is known as barkcloth.
yes.
And so in your own words,
Mm.
what is barkcloth? How would you best describe it?
Okay, so barkcloth is it is cloth that is one of the oldest, most ancient cloths made by man. It is organic. It is totally biodegradable. You don't, there are no chemicals used to make it. There are no additives added to the cloth and the finishing. It's all very naturally made, and you don't kill the tree to make the bark. So in terms of sustainability, this for me is one of the best, cloths in terms of what I stand for. But most importantly, it is for me the most rustic, most earthy, most difficult cloth to work with. And because of that, I find it quite a unique challenge, but very exciting as well. And I think it is organic. It's an organic cloth made by man, no weaving involved in making it. And there you are. It's one of those amazing natural things that have happened, natural gold.
Beautiful. And I think for our audience, it's important to identify, and this is like the, former professor in me, is that barkcloth is a non-woven. And as you said, it's not woven. So it's not
Yeah,
woven or knit. It
not
hasn't been
woven.
processed into a yarn and
Yeah,
transformed using other processes to create a fabric construction. It has been harvested from the skin of the tree,
yes,
essentially, and then from there it's processed
yeah,
using, and your website has amazing visuals, so I highly recommend people, and I'll give the link to your website so that they can explore some of the visual documentation that you've been instrumental in providing to educate the world about. It's beaten down,
yes,
essentially flattened out, and
yes,
it becomes almost like it's not leather. I mean, I want to say that it's leather-like in the sense that it's a non-woven. It
yeah.
doesn't sew or necessarily stitch in the same way as leather does, but it has this, it's skin-like. Maybe it's better for you to describe it. What's the touch like? What's it feel like?
Depending on what the different grades of bark, and the different grades of bark come from how old the tree is, what type of tree it is. So even though all the trees are from the same family, the mature tree, the Ficus natalensis, what happens is obviously different regions have different types of this particular tree, the mature tree. And so what age it is also presents you with a different texture and feel of bark. So the younger they are, they're almost like quite tough and not easy. And then in the middle stages. So I would call, because you can harvest a tree up to 60 years. So from the age of safely from about 5, they start to harvest from the tree. And the idea is you have to nurture the tree for harvest. So if you let the tree grow wild, you cannot harvest it, because they have to make sure that the branches do not grow along the stem of the tree as it gets taller and taller. They have to make sure that they keep trimming away those branches so that they have a clean area to take, about 3 to 4 meters high. And so that gives you enough room to create that, because it's not woven. So if it's made, I think the marble tree now, the tree they have in the Papua New Guinea, their bark is not as wide as ours is. So they have to stitch the pieces together to create large pieces.
Yes, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen that in an exhibition at the Museum of Anthropology in
Yeah,
Vancouver. Yes.
yes. So these trees can give you large pieces of bark. In my possession, I have one of the largest pieces of bark. I think it is the largest. It's 8 meters by about 4 meters, 3 something, so almost 4 meters, and then 8 meters plus wide.
Wow.
And it was hanging in the museum for the first time ever in the Kunstvergabe Museum in Berlin in 2019 for 3 months. And it's the first time, and I didn't think they would, hanging it, I was so worried, but it's so tough and so resilient. And so I was hanging from its side, and it was nothing could tear this thing apart. So it is quite resilient, quite tough. And depending on how it's made, and sometimes when it's being made, it stretches and it splits. And so you have stitches. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. And so
So they are, stitches that are put in place to kind of, stitch. Every harvester has got their own unique kind of stitching
Oh,
style.
wow.
So
Wow.
when you see different pieces of bark, it's just so amazing, because it's almost like their own signature on this bark. So, but some can harvest a whole piece of bark without any splits in it. So these are master harvesters. they're so good at what they do that they can tell when they've taken it too far and they need to stop and not split the cloth. So I have some very perfectly made with no stitching whatsoever. But I do love the accidental stitching because it adds authenticity and also adds that kind of human thing to it. It kind of, because it's hand stitched, so you can see the fact that it is, somebody's trying to kind of repair something. So it looks like a well-worn leather. And that's what's really so exciting about it. So that's something that I think is really quite exciting about different pieces of bark. And then obviously the colors will also be different because depending on how old the tree is or how young it is or time of year it is, how much water is there, is it a dry? They must harvest in the wet season. If they've had very many lovely wet seasons during the growth of this tree, then the bark will be really, really beautiful. But there's so many dry seasons, so then there will be kind of variation in the bark that they produce. But regardless of that, I think in terms of the fact that this tree itself is also quite crucial to the ecosystem. That's a whole other thing that we need to talk about.
Yes.
And maybe I'm going too far, but in terms
Not at all.
in terms of the texture, it's really quite rustic. Some of it can be very fine. So it depends on the tree and the harvester. So these masters have got a way of working their magic on this cloth and creating such different textures and also the beating of the bark, the way they harvest it, when they have to get into a kind of rhythm when
Like
they're
a
beating the
meditation.
bark. Yes, and that kind of creates a pattern on the cloth. So sometimes when you look at the cloth at an angle, you can see there's a pattern, and every harvester has got their own kind of pattern that you can see in the cloth. Because imagine it's not woven, it's not, there's nothing, there's no kind of modern twist to how they make it. So the way they do it with the beating of the bark creates this, it's almost like a pattern, within the cloth itself that has no color, but it is that. It's almost within.
And the way that you're describing it, like two things come to mind. It's like when I think about how music's made, because
Yes,
obviously there's a sound that comes through the hammering and the drumming
yes,
and beating of the skin. It's like drumming, and and then also the way that you're describing it and the way that I can imagine, it's almost like feeling and hearing the heartbeat,
yes, it is. It is.
and that level of transference between, we'll say, maker and finished material. I mean, there's always been a, a history in the making of cloth, inevitably carries through the energy of that person, the essence of that person. And and so I completely get that. And I just that really resonates is what I'm trying to say. And I wasn't thinking of that, especially in my preparation in speaking with you today, because I mean, in a lot of ways, it's still very new to me. And I think this is a perfect opportunity for me to ask you, what does bark cloth mean to you?
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. What you said that is so, I'm going to take you back to what you were
That's
saying just
fine.
there.
Yes, do
It's got
this.
me so emotional now because you just said it there. When they work on this cloth, and usually these men work on their own, because once the harvest is done, it doesn't need two men to kind of beat the bark. One man will work in solitary, or maybe two. And it's such a kind of a transformation of energy from themselves to the cloth. So it's almost like they're putting their, sweat into it, if
Mm-hmm,
you want to put
mm-hmm.
it that way. And that energy that's transformed into the cloth, when I get this cloth, I feel it. I get that. And I can't be playing around with this and just wasting it. Whatever I do with it, got to mean something, right?
Absolutely. One level to honor and be thankful for it as a material and as a resource. But
Yeah.
then the person who's been
Yes.
instrumental in, I already said earlier in our initial conversation that you act as this interpreter of this material in so many ways, but then you have this silent interpreter that's taken this resource and has given it life.
Yes. And they're always there silently, right? You just said it.
That's quite beautiful. I mean, like unbelievably powerful. And it's gotten me a little bit emotional.
You just got it there. I just had to jump in before I lost it. You just said it.
It's
This
okay, it'll come back
silent,
because it'll come back.
yeah. You said this silent
Interpreter,
Yes,
silent interpreter. Yeah.
yes, who's always there. They never leave, no matter what, because they're they're the ones who started it, and that's why I always say that history is so important, because knowing that that silent person, that who started this whole thing, created it, has got to be there through and through, and it takes me back to my faith, because I know that this is bigger than me. I'm
Mm.
only just part of it for now. Somebody else will take this on and run with it. But it's not just that. It's just knowing that we are working and doing something else. I dread to think, what if I never found this? What if I didn't know this was what I was supposed to do?
Hmm.
Where would I be? That'd be crazy, right?
I don't think it's crazy because ultimately, and how I've understood my own personal journey and relationship to materials, and the fact that you chose it, but it also chose you in the sense that you are. I mean, coming back to what I said about you being an interpreter of this material and being able to take it from your native country of Uganda. You're here in the UK. You are, and we'll get into talking about your projects and different initiatives that you're doing to help further educate and promote the use of this wonderful material resource. But I just think about how you are able to. I mean, it's one thing what you do with it, like, as I mentioned before. I don't want to sound like I'm repeating myself, but it's also ultimately given you this sense of, I don't want to say it's the only thing that gives you purpose in life, but the fact that it's allowed for you to, it's part of your foundation in
Yes,
how you choose to understand and approach materials, I think.
yes,
That's how I see it.
yes,
And the fact that you keep coming back to it, and it becomes this conduit as a material between other things that you use,
yeah,
allowed for you to create a foundation and a philosophy for how you approach your materials and in your creative process and your life. And
yeah,
the fact that it's happens to be a cultural cloth that you are associated with naturally by, because of the fact that you come from a region where this has historically been practiced,
yes,
but it's also given you this opportunity to further advance knowledge about it and its
yeah,
story and the storytelling that kind of comes through,
yeah,
and what we've identified so far. And that's the fact that it's giving you life in
yes,
areas which is bigger than, as you said, it is bigger than you.
yeah,
And the
it
spirit
is.
of the cloth has asked you, and this is how I see it, the spirit of the cloth has asked you to help take it into these other areas, so that
Yeah,
the message can be further
yeah, yeah,
developed.
yeah. I understand what you're saying there. And what this cloth means to me as an artist and as a designer, I see it gone beyond. Most people think because you're in fashion, they kind of put you in a box. No, it's allowed me as an artist to express myself beyond the constraints of tradition, what we're expected to just be doing as clothes design. It's allowed me to think beyond that box and break the rules, but break the rules with good reason. Because I think that's really important, to break the rules with a good purpose, good intentions. And that's where all my initiatives have sprung forth from that point. And it's allowed me to use it to express myself, like the graphics I have on my t-shirt, on, clothing, to do these things, because I can manipulate it and do that. Whereas if I try to use something else, it would not be true to what I stand for in terms of sustainability and the eco side of things. So it's been very much, I use it like a paint, as an artist uses paint. I use it, to drape and mannequins and make clothing out of it. And I also use it around the house, and I do things with it. In my house, it's everywhere.
I can imagine.
Lions and lampshades and cushions. I have some cushions here. And I do all kinds of things.
Those are beautiful.
Thank you. It's just, I've just surrounded myself with it, and not just for the sake of, but it just won't let me sit still. I have to keep doing. I keep, what else? It's just a constant conversation, constant, attachment to this. And then for me, when I found out that actually my mother's father made bark, I was, it just, everything made sense. Everything just fell into place. I understood why. I knew it. I understood it, and I wanted to work with it because again, everyone kept saying to me, "Why bark?" And I just kept saying, "Yes, why not?" And when my mother told me, this was in 2014.
Oh, so fairly recent.
Yeah.
Relatively, yes.
And she'd never said anything to me. So I've been working with Barkcloth for 6 years before she then told me, no, not 6 years. I've been working with Barkcloth for 14 years because I started in 2000.
Right.
And when she then said to me, when she said, because I could not understand how she knew what to get me. She always knew the right textures. When I said soft, she knew what to get for soft. When I wanted something quite, stiff to create the structural, and when I create those structures, there's no boning in it. There's nothing in there that you imagine would need to use in terms of the conventional way of making garments. So it's allowed me to kind of break the rules without having to compromise. That's the word, without having to compromise. So when she told me that her father made bark, I just thought, no wonder you knew. Why didn't you tell me? She said, well, as a child, she used it, as a blanket, bedding. And I remember that very clearly. We had a show. I'd taken my work to Uganda for the first time after working with it for 14 years. And my mother and father were coming to see me off. I was going to prepare for the show, and my dad was coming later to watch the event. And we were outside, and my mother and my father started sharing. And she asked my father, she said to him, I used this as a child, we used to sit around and wait for my father to come from, where he was harvesting the bark, looking forward to getting a piece, for the night because, theirs had grown old and they needed some fresh ones. And the cold season had come in again because it was rainy season, and that's when they always harvested. And my dad said to her, do you know, I also used it as a child. So my parents had been married for 50 years and they had never shared this.
Wow.
So I just had I not chosen to work with bark, this is a conversation, a story that they had, something they'd shared as children, they would never have known to kind of, have this conversation now. So just kind of it blew my mind. And so for me, it's not just me adopting somebody else's. This is my, direct heritage. My ancestors made bark, because for my grandfather to have made bark, his father must have made it, and his father must have it, because it was a tradition that men taught their sons, and their sons taught their sons, and that's how they passed on the tradition. And this is what's so exciting about it. It's been orally transmitted from one generation to another. So there's a whole line of harvesters going back years and years in these particular families. And that is just standing on whose shoulders? It's crazy, right?
That's pretty huge. But exciting nonetheless. I mean, aside from the amazing context and the level of inspiration that I'm sure it provides you, it's doing the same for me right now. So, and I think that you've already touched upon some aspects of how and why it is important to, the history and the culture of the people of Uganda. And obviously, and it's clear in your own ancestral lineage as well. But what does it ultimately provide, and what does it mean to the history of the culture?
What it does is, apart from the fact that it is handed down orally from, parent to parent, father to son, and onwards like that, it's a huge part of who they are and what they are, because they used this for everything. When I say everything, it was used for clothing, it was used in the house, it was a huge part of their identity, who they were. And my mother told me something quite beautiful. A father taught his son, and when his son came of age, he then had to plant his own trees, so that he then had, it was almost like having cows, like having so many, because in Africa, having so many cows, that's wealth. So for them, having so many trees was a sign of health, of wealth. So a good, wealthy person had about 10 trees or more.
Okay.
So the reason why they're 10 is you don't plant a forest of trees, matuba trees. You plant them within your banana plantation. So the bananas
Okay.
are like the main food that they eat. So within this plantation, you plant the matuba trees. Now there are two things. These trees are actually perfect for the ecosystem. So these men knew that when they had these trees within this plantation, when the dry season came, there was no rain. These trees supported that ecosystem by releasing water into the soil, and all the plants around these trees would survive these droughts.
Amazing.
So it was not just clothing. The tree itself was a giver of so much. Medicinal things, the leaves were, used as a kind of cure for stomach ulcers and other things, and, feeding the cattle and the goats. And, so there's so much that they got from the tree, not just clothing, so much more that they knew they needed these trees. So it was an absolute important thing to hand over, to pass on to their children, that they must have these trees. And whoever had these trees and harvested the best bark, their wives always looked the best. They wore the best bark when it came to traditional ceremonies where they had to all be dressed up in their best clothes. They had the best bark, and that was the measure of your wealth, how well your women looked. So everyone was just like a basic culture, very basic. When you think about it, put it in context, you're here, where it was so important that your woman had the best new clothes every time she stepped out. That was the same there as well. So when I have this thing I'm working on now, and I will share with you later, is to look at how the two progressed, here, and then in Africa as well. It's just something that I've been thinking about. So that's another thing that kind of really excites me. And so I think the barkcloth, you can't just have the bark on its own. The tree comes with it.
Right.
And that's really important to the communities and to our ancestors, that they had these trees everywhere they lived. And, a huge important part of what they needed, to support their families. And I've lost my train of
No,
thought.
that's fine. This is a perfect opportunity for me to respond, because in just your description of how integral the role of the tree in relation to, I'm trying to look for the right term when it comes to, I don't know why it's leaving my brain, but it's not crop rotation, because these trees are obviously integral to the soil and the health of the banana trees.
Yeah.
And of course, it is a resource that has obviously provided medicine and other elements that as a resource that has fed the family and the community.
Yes.
But it's also given this community fabric. It's
Yes.
in a way that has allowed for just this as you know, fashion is the first form of, visual art. Our clothing
Yes.
is an integral part of our physical identity and cultural expression. But the fact that it's allowed for these women, and in particular, and just what you were describing, to kind of have an opportunity to showcase not just their family wealth around the accessibility of this material, but it also, again, it situates it in a way that obviously socially, politically,
Yeah.
economically,
Yeah.
what it means to the history and the culture of Uganda. But and I'm just, one thing that just popped in my mind, and is it spread all throughout Uganda, or is it just certain regions that this exists in?
Okay, so this particular tree was everywhere in Uganda. It was everywhere in Uganda and beyond Uganda. So it went into Kenya, it went into the DRC, and we know that it went as far down as Zimbabwe,
Okay. Yep.
Zambia, and Malawi, and we know historically that it went that far, the making of bark, and particularly, I think the trees would have been similar to the ones in Uganda. So in Uganda, yes, it was everywhere, but because of the different regions and different parts of Uganda that have different kind of vegetation and water in terms of rainy seasons and how much there was or wasn't. So they produced different types or grades of bark from different parts of Uganda, but they were there. And we know that the king of Bunyoro, which is a part of, he was a big kingdom. And if you Google Bunyoro Kitara, big kingdom, the Buganda kingdom, which is the central part, the southern part of Uganda, which is where I come from.
Okay.
My parents come from, and they all use bark. And the kings all use bark as part of their finery, their best clothes. And then I think around when colonization happened and the missionaries came and things changed, people were discouraged from using this barbaric cloth, bark. And it was, the trees were cut down quite extensively in a very, very big way. If they were not cut down, they were not harvested. So they grew wild. And if they grow wild, you cannot harvest them.
Yes, I remember.
So then it fell on the shoulders of the kingdom of Uganda, which is a central part of Uganda. They kept it as part of their main king's finery. So that was the cloth of kings for them. They were not going to give it up. And because of that, that's why it's now pretty much predominantly produced in Uganda, in that central part of Uganda.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to get a sense of that because I didn't want to assume that. I mean, I can imagine that historically that it was for everyone, but I know how much that's changed. And so I just was wondering how much of the impact of colonialism would have had on the use of this particular material and resource.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is that even though it was, because obviously other cloths came, like the woven cloths by that time, which we talk about the cotton, remember silks and other kind of the Arabs brought so much, so did the western part of the world brought when they came into Africa. They brought so many things. They kind of distracted and created a competition, you like to say, for bark. And so change happened. And so when that happened, a lot of people lost interest in learning how to make it. People left, people traveled, because then travel really happened. People traveled for work. And if you travel for work, you're not going to learn skills from your parents or your grandparents or whoever. So a lot of the tradition began to die down and die away. And that's one of the reasons why the initiative that I started, Bark to the Roots, it's one of its biggest missions is to have a lot of young people have the opportunity to learn how to make bark, because this then saves that heritage. Because otherwise would lose this and it would be lost forever.
And speaking of Bark to the Roots, which is an initiative that you established in around 2014.
Yeah.
And so can you describe a little bit more about this? Because I think it's an important part of a lot of the work that you are continuing to do as a whole in working with Barkcloth.
So Back to the Roots, basically it is anchored in the Sustainable Development Goals. And in particular, encouraging to save the heritage and environment. That particular side of it is what really excites me, and that's what we stand for in BGTR, is in hand, the environment and the heritage. And those two come together, because if you plant more trees to make the bark, to harvest the bark from, you're saving the environment, right? So you don't have to do two things. You do one thing and the two happen. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And also in listening to you, I was going back to thinking about but the heartbeat again, and trees are the lungs of our environment. They are so integral, and what they do in exchange as part of the the larger ecosystem and how it operates. The fact that it is life that continues to give through this cloth and through this material, and as a whole within sort of the cultural material community, that it's been so instrumental
Yeah.
as a whole. And the fact that you are continuing to work with this and motivate and activate its presence and its use, that is such a powerful and beautiful role to kind of be in, I think, in a way that ultimately is breathing new life into where this can go, not
Yes.
just in the present, but also in the future. So
Mm.
I wonder, is there anything about working with Barkcloth that continues to surprise you in some way?
Totally. All the time. When you think you know it all, you know nothing. It's constantly giving. And I cannot, that's why I say I can't stop. It won't let me stop because there's so much to learn, so much to discover, so much to do that I don't think I have enough time
Well, and I think
to do it all.
I can understand that because it is, as you said earlier, you're in constant conversation with it. It's around you. It's
Mm.
speaking to you. It's your teacher.
Yes, it is, for sure.
Although it's a really sort of slow revealing, it's this beautiful relationship in that, of course, you're only going to be able to do so much with it, but the fact that you're able to impart your knowledge
Yeah,
and what comes through you is one thing, but what the potentiality of where it could go and how it will continue to have an impact beyond
yes,
your use,
yeah,
that's, I mean, that's instrumental. And to be able to pioneer that in a way that allows for it to live beyond
yeah, beyond us.
us. That's right. Actually, that's way
Yeah,
better said. So just to kind of come to a practical component of my understanding of this material, how does it age over time? Because I know I've seen it. You've described what the varying types of thicknesses and how it, sort of performs in that way. But over time, does it soften? Does it, I know it's 100% biodegradable because of where it comes from as a resource, but how does it perform over time? And what does it look like as it ages? Does it get shinier? Does it get, because it's almost like a very suede texture
yes.
to describe it in my own knowledge. So can you share what happens as it ages?
So over time, it's like depending on where you started, what you started with. If it's very smooth, then it's going to just get softer, and they actually can't make it really soft because I do have something that I'm working on with the community in doing experimenting with the bark before they hand it to me,
Mm.
applying natural ways, nothing chemical about what we're doing with them, but create different kind of textures and beyond what would be naturally available from the natural harvesting of the bark. What else can they do? So they make the black as well. Did you know that?
You know what? I remember
Yeah.
when I was in your studio, I do recall seeing that lovely, it's black, but it's almost like a deep chocolate, like it's
Yes.
like a deep black
Yes.
brown, I want to
Yes.
say.
It is. Yes, it is. It's not quite. It's not
Beautiful.
quite black. Like you'd have a
No,
black.
but it's almost, yeah, it's like what you can imagine when you see, I don't want to say a burnt tree, but like when you see that charcoal, it's like, it's a really interesting hue. But I do have that short little video that I shot in your studio from a couple
Yeah.
of years ago, and I might have to share that as a result of promoting this episode. But I think I only documented, um, sort of the reddish hue, the red sepia sort
I
of
can
toned
send you.
rust colored bark cloth, but it is, do you have examples of it on your website?
I do have examples of the black on my website. This is some artwork I was working on, and
Oh
this is
yeah,
the
I could see
black.
the hand. Wow, so that's the,
But I don't know if you can see the text. You can't really see the texture, can
not
you?
so much, not so
Yeah.
much, but
But it
it's,
is. It's like a leather. So black is not quite black, is it? It's not black.
in
So
this case, to describe it, it's almost like this one seems more
it's
of
like a
a,
deep brown,
it's
and
like a,
they never come out the same. They never come out the same because it depends on what part of. Because they do that in a swamp. They
oh,
put that in
interesting.
clay soil in a swampy place,
Ah, okay.
and they keep that in for 7 days. So they
So it's
take
almost
the
like a
brown,
fermentation
yeah, so
process.
they take this brown one like this and they put that in the clay soil and they keep that in there for about 7 days.
Mm,
And in 7 days, they take it out, wash it, and it's black like that.
fascinating. So
So
I'm
it's,
just curious what minerals in the clay that, because my knowledge of natural dyes and different mordants that are used in dyeing,
yeah,
that allow for, because black is one of the hardest natural
it is.
dyes to achieve,
Yes,
historically and globally. So
yeah.
I'm familiar with some, but that's an interesting. That's just where my brain just drifted off right now. So
So the black is really interesting, but you never get the same black. Black is always there's always a variation.
which
So
is
I
I
have
love
to
those.
warn I have to warn people that you'll never get the same. Just like the terracotta. If we've made garments and we've used terracotta, we're going to have it will never be exactly the same, but we aim for something as close as possible because it's a natural thing. You can't play with nature. It gives you what it gives. You can't. And the color actually happens when it's put out in the sun to dry. So how long it's exposed under the sun is how dark it gets, the terracotta. So I have two here, this one and this, that's all bark. But you can
I
see
see. So
how,
yeah, they're two very one's very quite, I'd say
yeah,
medium tone, and the other is
yeah.
a definitive terracotta color. Yes,
Yeah, so this is quite stiff because that's how I want it to be, because this is like a wallet there.
it's a wallet. Yeah.
And then this is an eco fan. So you really need it to be stiff, but it is actually two together. So that's what makes it
So it's almost like
breathable.
the way that you've done that, you've treated it or approached it almost like a cork in a way. It's not cork,
Yes,
but it
yes,
has that ability
totally.
to be utilized in that way.
Absolutely. So I have to choose specific types of bark to create specific products. And so the wear and tear will depend on what I have used.
Right.
So I'm very much checking to make sure that I've chosen the right thing for this particular thing or that thing. But even though it wears out, for example, I had a laptop bag that I made for myself in 2011,
Okay.
and it's now 2021, 10 years. It's, not falling apart, but it just looks like a well-worn leather. If it does fall apart in certain places, and I've not been kind to it at all. Something that I did to just see to test it out and see how far I can push it. So I put nothing in there to protect it whatsoever. I just put the whole thing together and I just wanted to see how long it would last, and work in
That capacity, because you do want to, when you're doing product development with certain materials and processes, you want
yes,
to see what limitations, and
absolutely.
as you identified, you do choose certain barks for certain applications.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So in for that use as a laptop bag, I just wanted to see how it would work in terms of not just aesthetically, yes, important, but also how resilient it would be.
mm,
How long would it last in time and start falling apart? So it did kind of like in certain places, especially, like the edges, they started to wear out, around the corners. But it's an interesting kind of look. And I like it. It just looks like cherry chic, just something that looks a bit like a well-worn leather coat that you just won't give up. So around the elbows, it's quite. Do you get it?
yes, I totally do. And just the fact that it has this ability to be, as you just described it. I mean, I can imagine the level of patina that happens over its lifetime, and then the fact that it can be this reinforcement in so many ways.
That is it. That is it. And I think once I did that and I realized that it would work, then I started the process of
Mm, okay.
accessories and just to see how, and I always kind of let people know that I've added nothing to it, try and keep it as
Mhm.
natural as possible because I think it's important that we kind of keep this,
Well, the essence of the cloth.
yes, like we were saying, yeah, the
Mm.
essence. That's a very good way to say that, to put that. I think I'm going to keep that one.
Oh,
Yes.
by all means, by all means. So I know that you utilize sort of upcycling. I don't want to just define as such, but in researching your practice and other things that you use, you do use Barkcloth, but you do incorporate other materials and processes, but you do use some secondhand clothing or upcycling as part of your creative practice, as I would like to say, you use it as a tool to kind of reimagine and create new design ideas, which I'm sure does impact how you use, other materials and how you kind of want to push the conversation of where bark cloth can be and where it can go. So I'm just curious, like, are there any other sort of materials and processes that you're looking to use to incorporate with the story of bark cloth or the use of bark cloth?
So I think you've kind of said it all there. You've talked about how I upcycle, and that's a huge part of my R3 campaign. I have done it from when I was a child. It's part of who I am, naturally reusing things. So applying Barkcloth to my upcycling was a natural progression as well. So I do have, in fact, my new collection is called Past, Present and Future, and it combines taking Barkcloth, which is the past and the present, and I know it will be in the future, combining it with garments that have also existed, pre-worn garments, used garments, reimagining them and presenting them, again, so that's the new take I have on that. But also I do work with other textiles, other cloths when it comes to bark, because I think it's important that people, yes, I'm pushing Barkcloth, but I'm also quite excited about, like doing this print on sustainably sourced silk in the United Kingdom, doing this print, because I think some people might think, well, bark is too harsh, I don't want to wear bark. But I know most people like to wear something silky. So
It's true.
So, combining my love for bark with my story about, the R3 campaign, all in a print on silk, I think was a natural progression for me in terms of getting the things that I love to push them so that they're accessible to people who would maybe want to be part of this story. But also with organic cotton, and I know there's a big thing about organic cotton, about the fact that cotton itself is not good, blah, blah, blah. Yes, conventional cotton is not good. And that's but then I also say, if you take away the livelihoods of these people who are growing organic cotton, what will they do? How will they earn their living? Because that's all they know. So they've changed from conventional cotton to growing organic cotton because they have the land, they have the rain, they don't have to depend on. They're not draining any water lakes to grow their cotton.
Mm-hmm.
How are they going to earn their living? So these communities will be affected if people totally go away from cotton. And what are we going to replace cotton with when we need cotton in hospitals? We need cotton in,
That's
cotton
right.
has a lot, not just clothing. So it's very easy for us to come and say blanket statements, this and, do this, do that. We cannot forget that some of these people's lives depend on doing this. So for me, if I can responsibly source organic cotton, I will use it.
Mm-hmm.
And hemp,
Miracle fiber. I did an interview with, I'll share with you quickly, with a gentleman who's been instrumental in producing Himalayan hemp. So it's
yeah,
grown wild. And he's, I mean, I should, I'll send you that information. And
yes,
the company's called Convolup. And so it's really amazing what they're doing with wild nettle and with wild hemp, and the impact of the communities that it
yeah.
is having, and just his whole approach is quite smart and quite innovative. And so I completely, hemp is, I mean, hemp has been the future
I
for.
really love it. I really do love hemp. So I do quite a lot of work with hemp, and I have been for so many years
Mhm.
alongside the bark. So I haven't not just been working with bark on its own, but I just chose to make it a huge part of what I do because I think it's important that I promote this and push it because there's sustainability involved in that. But hemp is a huge part of what I do with the bark. And bamboo, organic bamboo, the pea silk, pea
Mhm.
silk.
Pea
So
silk,
there
yes.
are other textiles that I work with, other fabrics that I work with, but they all have to be in that side of things. They have to be eco-friendly.
Mhm. Mhm. And so I think, as we get close to the end here, I just have a few questions. And I think for our audience, I mean, you've been very clear in how Barkcloth has had an impact on you, and how it continues to have an impact on you. But what sort of misconception or knowledge gaps do you think our audience should be aware of when it comes to Barkcloth? Is there any sort of misconceptions that you think exists out there about the material?
I think there are quite a few, but I probably might not be able to cover everything. But one thing I need to say before we go into this is that for so many years, I was working on trying to weave bark. And when I say weave bark, I'm not trying to get fiber out of it and have it woven like any other cloth or breaking it down with any chemicals or anything like that. No. What I was doing was using the bark as it is, combining it with organic cotton and using that so the bark strips and then woven.
Okay.
And
So
for
it's
the
like a blended fabric versus a blended fiber.
it's pardon?
So like a blended fabric versus a blended fiber. So you were just describing, because I think for audience, they understand the difference. What a blended fiber and a blended fabric is that
Yeah,
you take two components, like the raw fiber of the cotton
yeah,
and the bark cloth. It would have to be broken down so that it would be spun into a yarn.
yeah,
It makes a
exactly.
blended fiber. But you're talking about a blended fabric.
That is it. That is it. So that's how we've woven it. And in the exhibition that I had in 2019, it was a huge part of it. You know, for the first time ever, I made garments, tea garments, out of this woven bark. I've been working it from when I started in 2000, I started the process of trying to get it done, and I couldn't get it right. So finally, we got it right. We had it in this exhibition, and I will send you some of them.
I was just going to ask you because I think it's important for our audience. I'm going to
I
share
will.
those images
I
and
will.
links to that when this episode's released.
Yeah, I will send you an image of the garment, and then I'll also send you a piece of the woven bark. I think what is really quite exciting about it is the fact that I realized that I don't have to break down the barkcloth to weave, to get it moved on to the next level. I can keep the natural state of it as it is, combine it with organic cotton, or combine it with any other thing. So I've got a few other projects in line, like combining it with wool and other things.
That's exciting.
Working on this. So that's quite exciting, and maybe we can do it with hemp as well. So
Yes.
all these things in the process that are happening now. But we had to start somewhere. But that's what's so exciting. The fact that we've started there and that's working. And now we go forward and moving this. So that's a beautiful thing. But I think one of the things I have to share, and if it's not an easy cloth to work with, it is something that you have to apply so many tricks and techniques to kind of get to manipulate and make it work for you, whoever wants to work with it. And I've spent years trying to develop techniques and ways of making it work. So it's not a straightforward cut the cloth and make a dress. No, it doesn't work like that. So these are things that I think are important for people to understand. You have to have patience and apply a lot of time to kind of make it work, which is what I've had to do. So it's not like going to the shops and buying, a roll of cotton. No.
Which is
It doesn't come.
Cut and sew. Yeah.
Yes, it's not on a roll of fabric. I do have them rolled onto, in my studio.
Yes, I've seen that. They're kind of, you roll them like hides,
Yes,
people can
exactly.
imagine when they're rolled up. If you can imagine what cow hides or what animal hides would look like, they're just sort of rolled up in this.
Yeah, that is it. It's like, that's why in so many ways it's kind of like when they talk about bark, they talk about leather, because it's almost like it's a skin, really. It's a skin of the tree. Yeah, that's what it is. So it's never going to be the perfect flat surface. And as you work with it, you will realize it will stretch and pull in different places. When you've worked with it for a long time, you know which way is the rope and which way is the weft. So you kind of understand.
Yeah, there's no traditional grain.
Yeah, the grain lines, you figure out which way you want your grain. Once you understand how it works, you know how to cut it depending on what you're making. So you have to have time to play with it. And a lot of people say, you mean experimenting? No, play with it. That's what it is. Because experimenting with something, you know what you kind of go in with, an idea. No, you have to allow yourself to just learn, by mistake, just by trying.
Oh, yes. And that's part of, the trial and error and the forms of tacit knowledge and the problem solving and solutions that happens from
Yeah,
from letting go of the fear of making a mistake, because,
yeah,
there's two different things that can happen. It can take you down a new pathway, but it also can
yeah.
create new directions in
Happy
working with the
accident.
material. Yes.
Yeah, happy accidents.
Yes.
So for me, that's what I found very exciting is that this never ending, and when I started working with it, I did like a whole big thing. I did the experimentation thing where I just experimented. And I realized while I was doing that, but actually playing with it is what brought me to the best results
Hmm.
rather than going to it in a very strict kind of way.
Linear way. Yes.
Yeah, I let myself just play with the fabric, just kind of what else, and I still have those. And that's where I get all my, current work from is my experimentation boxes there. And I keep taking from that because if I bring everything out at the same time, it's too much.
It would be.
This is in the year 2000. So, and I'm not yet anywhere near halfway where I did then. So yeah, so there is a lot there, and that's what I find quite exciting to be able to share this and push this forward. So yeah, so does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it's just important for our audience to understand that when it comes to misconceptions and misinformation that exists about fibers and processes, is
Yeah,
that they don't realize the level of process and well, I mean, I know the difference between experimentation and playing with materials,
yeah,
and in the fact that you identified what those things are during the creative process and problem solving, and where you can take materials and processes within the world of application and use and understanding what that means. And so for our audience that perhaps aren't designers, do not have a creative background, that's listening to it gives them a sense of connection and
mm,
understanding of what goes into
yeah,
understanding a material before you use it
yes, that's it.
ultimately,
That's what it is. Yeah,
and I just really want to kind of push that. There are these bigger relationships that
mm,
kind of come into play, not just in what you're doing, but as a whole, when we understand the role and the valuable role that textile serves in our everyday experience. It doesn't matter whether you are creatively using it or whether you are, utilizing it as something to wear or to use in your everyday experience. It's
yeah,
just there are these so many different complex,
yes,
relationships that gets handed on and gets transitioned throughout the lifetime and the life cycle of the materials that we use and experience.
mm.
I'm just wondering as we get towards the end now, so what does a material revolution mean to you?
When you sent me that email, the invite to,
Yes.
when I saw that statement, I thought, yes, she's definitely got it. I was in from the word because I understand that that's what it is. That's what I've been doing all these years. That's what we need to change the tide from the fast fashion we're fighting, from the distraction that the fashion industry has had on the environment. That's what it is. It has to be a revolution. It has to be, taking up arms, with our cloth and what we work with to create the change.
Hmm. And is there anything up and coming that you want to share with our audience? Like what's next for you, Josie?
Right. Okay. What's next for me is the new collection,
Hmm.
past, present, and future. One of the first, I have to share this now, the concept of this whole idea, which is upcycled, as you can guess, past, present, and future. The concept, one of the garments has been acquired by the concept look by the National Museum of Scotland, and the Kunstvergabe Museum have one as well.
Congratulations.
So thank you, thank you. So before I even get this idea, expanded, it's already gone places. But that's because every time I produce a collection, within that collection, there's a thread for the next one. So that's
Hmm.
what happened. So with the Signs of the Now, this particular concept was already there. And
True sustainability.
absolutely, this is it. And that's exactly it. I said there's no need to kind of constantly be going back to the drawing board, look for a whole concept, research a whole new idea. We've got the ideas, they're already there. Just keep expanding because the message stays the same. We must do something about our, carbon footprint. We must do something for the environment. And the only way I know how is to use my work to do that, to tell that story about the change. And so that's happening. And then I have this idea of a virtual motiva tree.
Yes, tell us. Tell us.
So one of the ideas that I've been working on is it started off with a virtual Christmas tree, and then it changed to a virtual motiva tree. We always had the idea together. So Fred Mutebi, an artist that I work with in Uganda, who has been a huge part of our BTTR. So he's been also promoting Bark through his work and through more than just his work. And so we came up with this idea of a virtual something, for Christmas. But then we're too late for Christmas 2020. So the idea is to engage young people or people of all ages, artists, creatives, all type of people, in talking about their idea, the experiences through what they've gone through basically through 2020. Obviously, we know what happened, right? The pandemic.
Yes.
So either that or express themselves about the climate change.
To go hand in hand.
Absolutely. So how do you see yourself? What do you feel? So put those thoughts and those feelings in a creative thing. It could be just a word, I'm sad. And you write that word on a piece of bark, for argument's sake, that size.
Okay.
And if you write or draw or sketch or embroider, whatever you want to do in expressing yourself, and then we get that image and upload it to a virtual tree that's going to keep growing with it. So these will be the leaves.
Oh, I see.
So as we get, so these will be the leaves with the art and everything. So that grows and grows. So the idea is that obviously I have to, whatever, I will have to ask for some kind of funds to support this. So whoever is taking on a piece of bark will donate something. And that donation goes back to the community to plant a tree or be part of training a young person to make bark. But the story links this person. So that links we here to those people there. And that tree is vital for anyone to enjoy. But it just creates that kind of, it's like a gift. You're gifting back to the environment through your donation, but you're getting something in return. You get to have this oldest piece of cloth made by man, most ancient, and you can tell your story. You can share this. So I think this is something that can be. I was talking to a woman who said to me, it's something that can be handed down in terms of like a family thing, to have this. You can frame it, you can do whatever you want with it, but you get to have that. So if you say, okay, fine, I don't want to wear a garment made out of bark, but I can help the environment by doing something like this. I think it's one way of kind of thinking about the connectivity, because one thing that we know now is that we're all connected. It doesn't matter where you are. If the weather in South America is no good, it's going to affect all of us, wherever we are. And knowing those links and those connections is why this virtual tree creates that connectivity, but also allows us to express ourselves. And also in that way, be able to help this environment that affects all of us sooner or later.
What I absolutely love about what you're doing with this initiative is that I guess the call to action that you are creating around not just the furthering the education and use, but you are ultimately allowing for the community and the story of this cloth to allow for people to connect at a time, tell their story. So essentially giving them access to, the bark cloth. They illustrate something in response to what they've experienced or whatever they want to say on this. They are sharing what their outcome is. And that's being built virtually for the world to see and to share and to experience. And you're saying that each bark cloth is going to serve as a leaf on
Yeah,
on this virtual tree.
yeah,
Wow, that's quite amazing. And I cannot wait for it to come into its full fruition. But I think it at the same time, what you are describing to me is that it's giving people the ability to participate and in the sort of reciprocal nature of
mm,
what the tree already naturally does in nature, but it gives
absolutely.
an opportunity to help fund the
Regenerate.
the yeah, exactly. It helps regenerate in ways that's giving to the community of people who are instrumental in harvesting, but it's also allowing for the history and the continuation of this practice to exist in Uganda.
Absolutely. That's perfect. Perfectly said. I think you're really good at that. Just a quick one.
Yes.
Is just to say that, as always, the R3 campaign throughout all my work, that's a never ending project. It's something that collection after collection, installation, doesn't matter, art or anything. The campaign is always there. Reduce, reuse, recycle in everything you do. R3.
Wonderful. And, again, I'm going to share links to everything that you're doing in images about your work. Now, this brings us to the part or the point of the conversation where I ask you to share something, a meaningful textile or garment. Has there been a textile that has had such an impact on you that, aside from Barkcloth, that you would like to share that has meaning for you?
Okay, so the meaningful garment that I have to share with you is the one from Identity My Way. It's the concept looking Identity My Way. And this particular garment, have been so lucky, has been acquired by two museums, the British Museum and the museum the World Culture Museum in Frankfurt. What it
Fabulous.
stands for is it's got my fingerprint. I used my fingerprint to create the graphics on the cloth. It's a single piece of bark, not cut in any way except for the opening to get into it. And there's the bottom part of it, the skirt. The graphics are my fingerprint, yes. And I haven't cut, it's just hand carved out, the print is hand carved without cutting through the edges. So it's all I did this myself. And it was almost like I was putting my stamp on it because that's who I am. My identity is Ugandan and British at the same time. So it kind of captures who I am. I wouldn't be who I am now if I hadn't been of Ugandan heritage,
Hmm.
but I would not also be who I am now if I didn't have this British side of me. So you can't separate the two. So that captures who I am. That's identity my way. That is who I am. And I am able to do this because of the Barkcloth and because of this other side of me. So what I used was organic cotton with that. And I think it's kind of like, it's kind of captures everything. That kind of says for me, oh, yeah, this is who I am. This
It's
is
your
me.
DNA.
That's it. You said it.
That's extremely powerful, and I thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah,
And I can't wait to, share this episode because we've really kind of broken down a really interesting sort of our discussions allow for us to really break down bark cloth as a whole, what it means to you, what it means within the bigger sphere of things, and where it needs to go. And so I'm so looking forward to following the release of your next collection and everything that you're doing. And so, and also to letting people know where they can participate and contribute moving forward. So thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me today. And I'm forever inspired by everything that you're doing. So
thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Really, really appreciate this moment that we have because it's magic between me. I absolutely love talking to you and sharing with you but you already knew all of it anyway. I didn't have to say
Well,
much.
there is, but I want to share and celebrate what you're doing because it's really important work. It exists within you and for others. And so I'm really looking forward to, again, seeing you in person once again
Thank you.
and visiting your studio and spending more time and contributing in any way that I possibly can.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, really do, because I think, yeah, I can't wait to kind of meet you in person when everything is better. We can actually go places.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of The Material Revolution. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, comments, or perhaps you may want to suggest a topic, material innovation, or an expert that you would like to hear on an upcoming episode, please reach out to us via email at info@thematerialrevolution.com, or you can contact us through any of our social media channels. If you haven't done so already and have enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe to the show via Apple Podcasts or from any platform that you're choosing to listen to this from. We would appreciate it if you could rate, review, and help us spread the word by sharing this podcast with friends. And if you would like to support this podcast further, consider visiting our Patreon page and make a pledge. You can do this by accessing the link that's located in the episode notes of this podcast, or you can visit our website or any of our social media channels where we will have that link made available. Well, that concludes our show for today. We hope that you left this episode feeling more curious about what can be done with textiles. Music for this podcast is provided by Interior Design, composed by Rob Mathrew. If you dig it and you want to hear more, please visit the link included in the show notes or visit our website for more information about his work. You can also find images from today's episode located on our website, www.thematerialrevolution.com, and other show highlights are available on our Instagram, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. You have this ability to sort of access both traditional form, the traditional knowledge around materials, and being able to act as an interpreter of
Yeah,
this particular
yeah,
material resource so that it doesn't get it, that doesn't happen to it. The fact that you are, this conduit, this one step away from this actual natural resource into, I mean, you do what you do with it as a creative, as a designer, but ultimately you're trying to carry forth this message so that the authenticity
yes,
of this material is maintained.
yes. You got it. You got it right there. And that is, you've articulated so well. I don't have to say any more to that. It's so perfectly put. I think one of the things that I really kind of always try and emphasize is that the history of something, whatever you're making, whatever you're trying to transform, is just as important as its future, whatever you're making.
Mm.
And when you respect that history and apply to the now, whatever you're doing with it, wherever you're pushing it for the future, it's going to be respected and be recognized for what it was and appreciated. And that's why you think about everyone connected in the chain. They're very important. From the man who made the cloth to the person who actually then makes the product to the person who then wears it. Those connections are so important that when we lose sight of it and forget that history, that's when that's the disconnection point we're talking about. So I think it's so important when you're creating to keep in mind that backstory has never been more important than now, because when we realize how the world will run out of the natural resources, they're not there forever. If we don't replenish, we don't protect, if we don't keep them.
I agree.
Yes, we've lost them.
I agree.